Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us here at the Master Health Forum and online for our latest in our Queen Elizabeth Scholarship webinars and presentations. I will give you just a quick little rundown of the forum and our scholarship program, and then I'll turn it over to our scholar presenters for today. The McMaster Health Forum is a leading hub for improving health outcomes through collective problem solving. We harness information, convene stakeholders, and prepare action-oriented leaders to be an agent of change by empowering stakeholders. The Queen Elizabeth Scholarship Program here at the McMaster Health Forum is managed by a unique partnership of Universities Canada, the Rita Hall Foundation, and Community Foundations of Canada, as well as the individual Canadian universities that are involved. This program is made possible with financial support from the Government of Canada, provincial governments, and the private sector. The purpose of the overall program is to activate a dynamic community of young global leaders across the Commonwealth to create lasting impacts both at home and abroad through cross-cultural exchanges encompassing international education, discovery and inquiry, and professional experiences. The forum has had two Queen Elizabeth Scholarship programs. The original program was the Queen Elizabeth Scholarship in Strengthening Health Systems, and we are one of 20 Canadian institutions to be selected for a second Queen Elizabeth Scholarship program, which is now running until the end of 2023. The focus of our current Queen Elizabeth Scholarship Program is Strengthening Health and Social Systems, where our scholars will contribute to strengthening health and social systems and become part of our large and growing network of health and social system leaders. Our original scholarship program engaged 14 incoming scholars and 3 outgoing scholars and 44 outgoing interns. So you see the list of all of them on your screen now. Our current program on Strengthening Health and Social Systems has so far engaged 7 incoming scholars and 13 outgoing interns. There are no outgoing scholars for this version of the QES program. And you'll see a picture there of some of our scholars who were recently at an event at Queen's Park with the former Governor General of Canada and the current Lieutenant Governor of Ontario. Our scholar presenter today is Maiura, who's a graduate student in the Master of Public Health program at Master University. Maiura's interest is addressing the impacts of social determinants of health with the aim of improving health and social equity. During her internship, Maiura aimed to use the global experience to understand the intricate policy and practice networks in South Africa and how they adapt to the population's needs. Maiura, over to you.
Thanks, James. Hi, everyone. Like James said, my name is Maiura, and I will be talking about my internship as a Queen Elizabeth Scholar with the Africa Center for Evidence over this past summer. So just as a quick intro about myself, I am a second-year graduate student in the Master of Public Health program at McMaster, and also completed my undergrad in life sciences here at Mac as well. Next slide, please. A brief agenda for today is that I'll go over the QES program, describe the forum partner at which I interned, and my project and other work completed at the partner site, and conclude with some final thoughts and reflections about my time spent here in South Africa. And so this picture is just one of my favorite moments from my time in South Africa. It was when I visited the Pilanesberg National Reserve Park and had a whole herd of wild elephants walk behind us. Okay. So before I delve into the specifics of the internship site, I just wanted to give a brief overview of the QES program and my engagement with the forum. So the Queen Elizabeth Scholarship in Strengthening Health Systems, also known as the Queen Elizabeth Scholarship or QES program, is housed under the Health Forum's Learn How programmatic area, which James had already mentioned. The QES program requires all scholarship recipients to participate in a leadership development opportunity, engage with current and past scholars, and travel abroad for a 90-day internship with one of the forum's international partners. So the forum facilitated my training in relation to evidence synthesis and international leadership and arranged for my full-time summer internship to be completed in South Africa from May to August with the Africa Center for Evidence, or ACE. So ACE is a research organization based out of the University of Johannesburg in South Africa. Their mission is to understand, collect, and contribute evidence towards reducing poverty and inequality in Africa and South Africa. They have 4 strategic goals, one of which is rigorous and relevant evidence synthesis. This goal covers ACE's work in producing systematic reviews, evidence maps, and responsive evidence synthesis. ACE pioneered the development and use of evidence maps in the African context, including adapting the process for developing policy-relevant evidence maps. So this goal also directly aligns with my project, which I will be discussing shortly. But before that, I outlined the few learning objectives prior to starting my internship with ACE to ensure that I not only learned as much as I could during my time there, but that I could also contribute to their ongoing work meaningfully. So the first one of them being was to learn more about the process of evidence synthesis and to improve on these skills. It was important for me to improve on my evidence synthesis and policy analysis skills, as my career goal is to improve the health of vulnerable populations through upstream research and policy. As well, having a good grasp on varying evidence synthesis methods and reporting formats would assist me with my work at ACE and beyond. My second objective being to engage extensively with diverse stakeholders, including those at the local community and government levels, as well as various service providers. And in doing so, I hope to gain a better understanding of local perspectives on gaps in current public health services, as well as policy implementation. In addition, pursuing this objective would enable me to collaborate towards addressing emerging public health and social issues in real time, which aligns well with my goal of working with and for vulnerable populations. My third objective was learning about the public health and social issues facing South Africa. I hope to contribute to the public health research landscape in South Africa on the project work I was assigned at ACE. And last but not least, getting experience in communicating findings, which would detail recommendations regarding future research and shape relevant policies. So now I'll give some background on the project itself, which is with regard to the end of life care, caregivers in sub-Saharan Africa are particularly burdened financially, physically, and socially when faced with caring for people who are ill, elderly, and or near death. As funerals and related services are an essential service included in the sector, it's important to consider these in policymaking and developing practice guidelines. On average, South African households spend about the equivalent of 1 year's income for an adult funeral between 2003 and 5, and costs have only risen since then. The COVID pandemic strained many populations. However, one we don't often think about is funeral directors and undertakers. Their small businesses struggle to keep up with health and safety changes and the increased demand over the pandemic. Rural and low-income areas lack adequate healthcare and social infrastructure in the country to support management of these deaths. And the small funeral businesses service these communities at below cost to ensure the needs of the families are met, but they are chronically underfunded and under-resourced to appropriately store, manage, and dispose of human remains. As a result, they are forced to break environmental health guidelines, which poses risks to worker health and safety. So now onto the project that I worked on. The project was inspired by the lack of integration of evidence, government policy, and providers in the end-of-life services sector. This produced noticeable gaps in all three areas, which increased community tensions across the country. So to better understand the context and nature of end-of-life services in South Africa, my project was developed around gathering evidence in the sector across the African continent to generate a pilot evidence map. Very briefly, an evidence map visually depicts the results of a systematic search of a broad field, highlighting limitations and gaps in research and policy. In these maps, research and review articles, national policy acts, other policies, and a bunch of other articles are plotted across a number of key desired interventions and outcomes in the field. So the first stage of building the evidence map was hosting a stakeholder session. I attended the project stakeholder session with environmental health practitioners and local funeral directors from the Gauteng province. And in the session, I had the opportunity to share my experiences and perspectives as a public health graduate student from Canada, which opened the dialogue on similarities and differences between our health and social systems and end-of-life care. The session highlighted the stakeholder perspectives with respect to the current state and regulation of end-of-life services, their roles and responsibilities, the impact of the pandemic on the sector, and how community members and funeral business owners are not included in policymaking. The stakeholders then outlined key interventions and outcomes desired for end-of-life services in South Africa. The next step of the project was to gather relevant evidence. So we defined the inclusion criteria based on the interventions and outcomes identified during the stakeholder session. And after generating the search strategy, I conducted the searches across a number of academic and gray literature databases. Through this project, I learned how to use the software called FE Reviewer 4, through which I screened the articles and completed data extraction for the evidence map. I coded each article by country, sector, intervention, outcome, and other factors that, when exported, generated the pilot evidence map. So we ended up with 101 articles, which includes primary research articles, guidelines on human remains management, international protocols, regulations around death certification, and more. And this picture is just kind of a snapshot of the final evidence map. Outcomes such as access to funeral and social services, good human remains management practices, and more are listed across the top in columns, and interventions are listed vertically in rows, and some of them include, for example, stakeholders like their local banks, environmental health practitioners, and government policymakers. And in the map itself, you can filter by country, topic, year of publication. The colored bubbles indicate the topic area of evidence pieces. So for example, articles relating to community members are shown in the purple bubbles. And when you go into the map itself, you can click on these bubbles and view the articles, as we have linked the PDFs for each of the articles, and you can kind of just play around with it. And so, I mean, this is just a snapshot, but again, unsurprisingly, there is little evidence across most outcomes and interventions relating to government oversight, financial and environmental health regulations, as well as the connection between policy and implementation. So I was responsible for drafting sections of the manuscript, including the methods, results, and discussion. And other projects I was involved with during my time at ACE includes drafting a grant proposal, as well as assisting ACE with communications tasks, such as updating their website content and YouTube portfolio. So looking at what I've learned, evidence maps are useful for community, government, and organizational stakeholders, as they can inform research projects and policy recommendations for any sector. And in relation to the project itself, no evidence map or similar evidence-based database has been created for the end-of-life sector in South Africa. The pilot map will be incredibly useful to funeral directors looking to adopt best practices in human remains management, to organizations advocating for social and financial assistance programs for communities, and to health officials and government stakeholders in establishing effective regulations in environmental health and public services. On that note, the work that we've done with this project has highlighted the need for increased funding to be dedicated for research purposes across all interventions, as well as resources for more engagement with funeral directors for effective policy development. Next slide, thank you. This project also fostered a working relationship between funeral directors and environmental health practitioners in the Gauteng province. Engaging with stakeholders was both inspiring and surprising, as I began to understand the personal and community stakes in the funeral businesses in South Africa and its townships, as well as the openness to collaboration towards a solution amongst the various groups of stakeholders. Sessions like these ones lay the foundation for their collaboration with government towards crafting effective policies that increase access to funerals, decrease barriers for local economic development, and maintain both environmental and public health. On a related note, I was able to attend, sorry, previous slide. On a related note, I was able to attend a conference where ACE researchers launched a policy-relevant evidence matrix, during which I learned that the challenges faced by researchers and government in the Gauteng province in South Africa are shared by those here in Canada, namely a lack of meaningful community engagement for purposeful policymaking that serve community needs. The picture on the bottom right is a picture from this conference. Next slide. So just to give a quick, I guess, overview of the country itself, South Africa is often known as the Rainbow Nation, as it is a multi-ethnic population. They have 11 official languages. And I mean, a lot of these that I hadn't heard about before I got there, and over 60 million people, over 9 million of which live in Johannesburg. So it is a densely populated city, and where ACE is actually located. And what was interesting to me also was that South Africa is a country in Africa that had the most UNESCO World Heritage Sites, and a lot of these consist of archaeological sites. And it is immensely diverse in its cultures, arts, languages, ethnicities, histories, wildlife, plant species, and landscapes. It is a really beautiful country. And just some, I guess, dark history that I wanted to share was that South Africa was colonized by the British and Dutch during different time periods, and apartheid is part of the country's history, which was imposed in 1948, and it institutionalized racism and racial segregation in South Africa. The apartheid ended in the early 1990s, but its effects are still felt today, with disproportionate access to education, healthcare, financial well-being, so on and so forth. And what was interesting to me in my own research that I found was that the racial classification system imposed during the apartheid was influenced by Canada's Indian Act. Yeah. And these are just some pictures that I took while in South Africa. And so during my time there, I had the privilege of touring some of the country's historical monuments, as well as its more postcard-worthy destinations, you could say. So I explored Soweto, where we visited Nelson Mandela's house, which is the bottom right picture, and the Hector Peterson Memorial, and spoke with local art vendors. We also visited the Apartheid Museum. So that's the picture in with the green background and the top right, to get a glimpse of life in South Africa during the apartheid and learn about the country's sociopolitical history. Next slide. And I'm also thankful to have had the chance to tour Cape Town and other geographical and historical locations, including the Sterkfontein Caves and safaris in the Plansburg National Park and Kruger National Park. And these are just some pictures again from my travel while in South Africa. Next slide, please. And so I just wanted to end off the presentation with a few key messages. So both South Africa and Canada experience a number of similar challenges in approaches to equitable healthcare and financing, access to social services, housing, and more. And the colonial histories of the two countries have long-lasting impacts on these social determinants of health due to the deeply rooted systemic racism. And with that said, though, it is promising that meaningful community engagement and cross-sectoral collaboration is gaining traction amongst governmental parties in implementing effective policy solutions. And this includes the end-of-life sector. And lastly, I just wanted to mention that South Africa does have more to offer than I expected, or at least was prepared for. And having the chance to explore the country's rich culture, history, traditions, landscapes, and cuisine was incredibly fulfilling. And being able to work alongside some of the brightest minds in the country that put research into implementation and practice in ending poverty and addressing pressing social and health issues was insightful and inspiring. And so with that, I thank ACE, the Health Forum, and the QES program for awarding me this opportunity to grow both personally and professionally. Thank you.